Shalom. My name is Avar Ben Shalom, and today we're going to be learning about a very important topic, which we're going to be focusing on the understanding and what does it mean with regard to a prophetess. What is a prophetess, and the understanding of what the Torah regards and teaches us about female prophets. And we're going to focus on specifically an issue called Devorah. Devorah spoke in the book of Shoftim, and in the book of Shoftim, there is a lot of people who, unfortunately, amongst the Messianic groups, they create these massive, widespread versions of what they want to think is Devorah, which is actually in regard to the Jezebel spirit. It's a false version of Devorah, and we're going to learn the correct version of Devorah and what is it Devorah did and what was it Devorah was permitted to do according to Torah. So, first, we're going to look at a few verses in the book of Shoftim. In the book of Shoftim, we're going to be going through Shoftim Daled, and we're going to be reading verses Daled and verses Hey. And we're going to focus specifically on this part as we go through and even discuss more in the verses below that coincide with the issue of Devorah. So the book of Shoftim says, "Udevorah Isha Navia." Devorah was a wife, a woman. Sorry, a prophetess woman. Eshet Lapidut, she was the wife of Lapidut, and he shafta et Israel, and she judged Israel be'etahi at that time. Now, here's the problem you have with people that don't know Torah and don't understand the Torah laws, is they take a word, for example, like shafta, and she judged, and they create a whole theology based upon what they think that she did. And they actually don't utilize the Torah parameters by which the Torah speaks of what is the rights and what a woman can and cannot do. Well, the first thing we have to understand is, what does the Torah teach specifically of what a woman can do and can't do in regard to the issues of Torah law? Number one, the Torah says that a woman can indeed prophesy of future events, and that a woman can speak of future events that are going to take place, and she can indicate these different Torah events or these different prophetic events that will take place, and tell the people to be warned about these events. What can she not do? The Torah tells us that a woman prophet cannot perform signs and wonders. This is only given to men in the Torah, as the Torah says that if you read and study in the Torah, never in any way, shape, or form were any women at any time ever performing signs and wonders for the community. The Torah literally says that with regard to women, that the two parameters that a woman had in being a prophetess in Israel was, number one, they could teach the future, and number two, they could guide the women into the proper conduct of how they are to act and perform. A woman was never allowed to be in any form of leadership, as the Torah even stipulates and shows us. And the Torah teaches us, showing the fact that no woman in any way, shape, or form was ever in any form of leadership. Now, here's the problem what people actually get into when they hear these words. And the first thing they think of is they start thinking that you're a woman hater, and they start creating these false ideologies as to the fact that, they don't think that it's fair that a woman should be limited in what she can and cannot do, and that men have such a broad range of things that the Torah permits them to do, that they can be in leadership, that they can prophesy, that they can teach, that they can instruct both men and women, and that they can command the attention of the community to be obedient to the commandments in leadership. And this is just one of the areas where you find people, instead of really seriously seeking out in the Torah and seeking to understand the Torah properly, and looking at for the examples that we see in the Torah and seeing the different things that are spoken in the Torah, what they would rather do is create their own version in order to deceive others by their own deception of what they've been led into themselves. And this is why it's important when we're ever looking at anything, that we have to understand that the Torah tells us exactly how a prophetess is permitted to act and perform and what she's permitted to do. And we see the things that are spoken of in the Torah. And if a person says, "Why I don't see it?" Well, it's just because they haven't studied the Torah in depth enough to actually see the things they need to, and that they need to do teshuvah in areas in order to be able to understand greater at what the Torah is saying. Because the Torah, in fact, teaches us exactly what a man and woman's roles are and what a man and woman is permitted and not permitted to do in the different categories and the different things of what they are told that they are and what they can. And we see all the pictures given us in the Torah as those examples so that we would understand the fact that there are guidelines to what a woman is allowed and what a woman is not allowed to do, and how far is this parameter given. So what are people doing with the fact of the reading of this passage of the scriptures when they say the word shafta et Israel, that she judged Israel? Well, they're creating an ideology of thinking that she had some form of authority and leadership. And they're presenting this by, there are some versions out there that are very perverted in the way they're translated. The NIV, for example, extremely is a very perverted one, where it tries to make you think that she led and she gave decisions and people come to her for the understandings of Torah and stuff. And this is just not at all what the Torah is saying. And we're going to learn this specifically from what the actual Book of Shoftim says, because the Book of Shoftim tells us exactly in detail what were the things that happened and what were the things that were taking place. So when we go forward, it says, "V'hi yoshevet echat tomea Devorah," that she was sitting underneath the palm tree of Devorah, "bein harama," between Ramah, "bein Beit El," between Beit El, "behar Ephraim," at the mountain Ephraim. "Ve'alu eleha," and they were seated unto her, Bnei Israel, "lamishpat," for the judgment. And this is where people do not understand that when they see, if they were to look at the Hebrew, and if they were to learn Hebrew, for example, lamishpat tells us two things. Number one, the patach underneath the lamed tells us that this is the definite article that's being attached to the word mishpat. And the lamed is the preposition that is placed in front of the word mishpat to tell us this is mean two. And so we know in grammatically, when you have a patach underneath the lamed, this is referring to a definite direct object. And so we know that this lamishpat means actually literally for the judgment. And this is a specific judgment, and actually the book of Shoftim tells us exactly what it was that they were asking, or what it was that was going on here. As it goes to say, "V'tishlach v'tikra la Barak," and she sent and she called to Barak ben Avinoam, the son of Avinoam, Kadesh, from Kadesh, Naphtali of Naphtali. "V'tomer," and she said alav unto him, "Halot tziva Adonai Elohei Israel lach," did not the Lord command the God of Israel to go Mashkafta, and that you should march Bahar Tavor, Mount Tavor, Velakachta, and you shall take Imecha with you Eser Elafim Ish, 10,000 men, Mi B'nai Naphtali, from the tribe, from the men of Naphtali, U B'nai Zebulon, or from the men of Zebulon." And you find as we go forward in this passage, what was really happening was, it was the men had come, and these would have been high officials that had come over to Devorah, and I wanted to ask her about what was it that God wanted in relation to the future event of how they were to deal with the issues of Sisera, and what his army had done and what they had done to Israel, and that she was basically prophesying in complete blatancy how they were to solve the problem, and that they were to go to combat and war, and they were to fight. And many people, like I said, they want to pervert so much in Scripture because they don't want to read the actual details that are written, and they don't want to sit there and look at the actual points that are given in the Scripture to make people think that a prophetess, she could teach men, she could go around and she could tell people what the Torah says, and that she'd instruct people in Torah law, and this is just absolutely false. And this is not what the actual Brit Hadashah or the Torah or the Nevi'im, the prophets, teach. The prophet tell us very clearly. And this is why, if you look at the whole profile of all the scriptures that are written, you're never going to find in any way, shape, or form a woman in authority. You just don't. And so what do people do? They like to pick on this passage. They like to create some, mountain out of a molehill here. And they want to create this ideology of making it look like as if, women can go around teaching men and go around commanding men and go around instructing men to do things. And what this passage literally says is that because Devorah was a prophetess, and she did have the ability to know the future because God would tell her the future, that the only thing that she had the ability to physically do was to tell the people what was the future event for Israel and what was to transpire and how they were to go about this action of solving this problem here. And this was what they were asking her, because this is what she did. She told the people about what was going on in Israel and what were the future events that were going to transpire or come about upon Israel. And it's amazing how people can take a passage like this and refuse to read the context of the passage and refuse to see the actual details in the passage, and they want to create this ideology that women can go around and just teach people anything they want. They can condemn people of sin by sharing the things that are in the Torah, when yet we find specifically written in the Brit Hadashah by the words of Paul himself, where he says that a woman has no authority to preach or to teach men. And as a matter of fact, women are to remain silent in the congregation, as so says the Torah law. And of course, many people who don't believe and don't like the words of what I just said here, it's because they don't want to search out the Torah to see that this is actually indeed true. You don't find any woman in the Torah whatsoever by which inside the Torah law itself literally goes around teaching men to do anything. You never find one passage whatsoever. Matter of fact, the only thing you do find are that the prophetesses, they told the future, and that was the extent of it. And the prophetess, as the scripture says, led women to make right moral decisions and to guide them in the path of womanhood, as we see with regard to Miriam, when the Bible tells us that Miriam, after the actual going across the Red Sea, after the crossing the Red Sea, that when everybody was rejoicing and all the men and women were getting very excited and exuberant over the issue of finally seeing that Pharaoh and his army had been stopped, that the thing that we find that's written in the Torah is the Torah teaches us that Miriam, in her rejoicing over the event, she saw that the women were acting immoral by the fact of dancing with men, and therefore she guided the women, and she danced and gave them the push to follow her so that they would go off in their own private area and dance and rejoice privately, while the men would dance privately. Which, of course, this is the thing that a prophetess does. She guides the women to be moral and guides the women to properly act in the way they're supposed to, where we don't see anything else in the Torah whatsoever with regard to women. Now, of course, there's a lot of people out there that like to play the game of, yes, but that's because, not everything is in the Torah like this, and that there's this idea of progressive revelation, and this is completely false. Everything is in the Torah. If you want to know what a man and what a woman is to do and how a man and a woman is to live, it's in the Torah. That's why we find in the book of Bereshit, the very first thing we see in Bereshit is Adam is given the commandment specifically to conduct the way he was supposed to act with regard to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and he instructed specifically his wife to follow exactly what God had commanded him. And we see the woman was to exactly follow that very thing that he said in order to be obedient and subservient to what God had commanded. And we see this going on throughout the Torah, that men are the authoritarians, men are the ones whom God instructs the Torah to, and men are the ones whom God imputes the information to the Torah to, and the women are to submit and be subservient to what God has taught their husbands, or what God has taught their fathers, and that their obligation is to be submissive and to be obedient to the very things that they're being taught. And, many people don't like to hear that because it's just, we live in a society of rebellion where everybody's just kind of after their own version of what they think is okay. And they're not really sitting there taking these things serious and saying, wait a second here. Is the Torah really saying that this is okay for women to do? Is the Torah really saying that this is how women are to act? Is there any real example that's given in the scriptures that prove this is true? And here's a perfect argument that I would place before you. There is a man that's spoken of in the Brit Chadashah that when he was healed, that he placed the argument before the Sanhedrin. And the argument he placed before the Sanhedrin is, has there in any time, in any place throughout the Torah, been any man who was a sinner who healed a man that was blind? And of course the answer is no. Matter of fact, the Torah tells us there was never one person at all in Scripture who ever was a sinner that ever was able to perform an act of healing. And therefore, what was the point of the statement? We see the point of the statement is that the man was trying to give us a nice hint as to know something by which even the authors who gave us the Brit Chadashah want us to understand that if we do not have any examples in any way, shape, or form that pinpoint or go to show us a version by which it is truly given in Scripture that such an event is true, then indeed the version is false. And this is why we go to see in the Torah that when we look at the issues of the commandments that are given in the Torah, we know that a woman is not allowed in any way, shape, or form in leadership. And that's why we find that God sets up in the book of Bamidbar the 70 elders, who are the men who surround Moshe in the tabernacle. And then, of course, we find later on in the book of Devarim, where we are learned and taught that in the Devarim, that Shoftim v'Shotrim, judges and officers, Titen lecha, you should place for yourself, Bechal Sherecha, and all your gates, where this is once again an issue of a commandment that men are to be placed in authority of leadership. And then, of course, we see that once again, at the beginning of Bamidbar, we find that Moshe speaks about placing the men who, as even the scriptures, tell us, that these are the ones who are in leadership, and these are the ones who will be put into authority. And it's just the undeniable biblical proof from what the Torah even says itself, when it says here in verse 13 of Devarim chapter 1, Havu lechem anashim chachamim v'nevuim v'yeduim. He says, prepare for yourselves men, wise and understanding and knowledgeable, l'shiftechem, for your tribes, va'asimeh barushechem, and I will place them at your head. God has never placed a woman at the head of a man. God has never placed a woman at the head of the community. God has never placed a woman to be in any way, shape, or form in authority over man. And that's just because that's what the Torah teaches us how we're supposed to keep and do. And when we want to follow the instructions, we need to follow exactly the pattern that's given to us in Scripture. I hope you would take these warnings and take these things serious, so that you would look at these things and ask yourself if you've fallen into a very demonic trap of the enemy, which is trying to get you caught up in a Jezebel spirit, which is trying to get you caught up in the false belief that you have the right to do things. Because, there's unfortunately a lot of guys out there that will act like as if they gave their wife permission to do things, or that they have rights to do this, but those men are just plain not even understanding the Torah law. They're not seeing what the Torah says. Their eyes are blind. They don't know what the Torah teaches. And I would like to just show you and stuff that, if you search at the scriptures and if you look at the scriptures details, you need to learn to prove to yourself what indeed the scriptures does really teach. Because when you take a little passage and then you try to create a monster out of it, but there's nothing supporting it all throughout the Torah and the prophets, you have to think twice about what direction you're really going in. Because the enemy, he wants to create a bunch of rebellious people out there. He loves to have a rebellious movement called the feminist movement, by which women sit there and they try to usurp the authority of men, and women try to usurp the attitude of what a man's allowed to do, and they want to place it upon themselves, because it's just the enemy trying to destroy the family unit. It's the enemy trying to destroy the structure of how the body is to be. I hope you would seriously take heed to these things and think about these things before you begin to start jumping the gun and thinking that the direction of this is okay. And I hope that you'll just take a prayerful time to search out the Torah and actually see for yourself that what I'm saying is true. I'll see you next time.